computer? I guess.
I always record to the cloud. To the
Good evening,
computer,
everybody.
I always worry about running out of room or something. Yeah.
Okay.
At any rate, well, good evening. We have a small group here tonight, but welcome. We're considering pricing carbon, and we're going to be learning about Boxerwood's COREworks program, where they initiate projects for that reduce emissions or sequester carbon to help offset consumers' emissions that choose to manage the harm that's caused by emissions. I guess I do want to say that we have, this is our last of our virtual programs that we have planned at this point, and our next program will be Peter DeVecchio, and he will be talking about snakes. He's a snake enthusiast, and we will be at Jordan's Point Pavilion, and that, let's see, what's the date on that one? June 21st. So in the fall, we've reserved the old courthouse meeting room, and so the seminars will be on the third Wednesdays. Generally, December is the exception. At this point, we have a program lined up for October. Mike Collins of American Climate Partners will talk about his work on managing land deliberately to sequester carbon. So I met Mike through this seminar. He checked in when David Yarrow was presenting for us, and since then I've developed a relationship with Mike, and we potentially could work together on some things. So hope y'all consider being there. Let's see. If you have thoughts on who might want to represent an idea or a project that protects and enhances our natural and heritage, our natural and heritage resources, then please nominate them and consider doing a seminar. So I am going to do a brief overview of the measure of what we face here. In 2023, CO2 concentration is 400, excuse me, that was 2022. The average CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is 417 parts per million. In 2000, it was 370 parts per million. Currently, the concentration of carbon dioxide is growing by 2.35 parts per million per year. And I know this group already knows that's problematic. But I do want to look at some implications about that. So I'm recycling this presentation I gave a few years ago. So a climate skeptic was disputing the seriousness of our human-caused emissions by noting correctly that our human-caused emissions were relatively small compared to the emissions from nature. And so I looked into it, and this chart, can you see the chart?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this chart was from the IPCC, you know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change run by the United Nations, and big round numbers, validated his point that this 29, can you see my cursor moving around there?
Yes.
Maybe, yeah, okay, yeah. That 29 is our human-caused emissions compared to 439 for vegetation and land. and 332 for the oceans. So that seems relatively minor. And so that could seem like, what's the big deal? But the big deal is that the sequestration by both of these categories is greater than the emissions. So I made this chart here that's proportional. Now, see, here's our little bit of human emissions compared to the ocean and the land. And what's relevant is the difference between the sequestration, that little piece there, and that little piece there adds up to 17 gigatons. This is the same chart with a break line in here, so you can see what's relevant to us, which is the net sequestration by land and the net sequestration by the ocean. So add those two together, and the good news is that our 29 gigatons of human-caused emissions, at least in that year that the chart was representing, most of it is captured by nature and is in the carbon cycle, most of it. So that makes it seem like it's doable. But the bad news is that the 12 gigatons, in this case, over the net zero line, is added to the concentration into the atmosphere. So I consider it like a debt because it is cumulative. And even though the atmosphere is real and our whole currency financial system is a contrivance by humans, most of us have a working understanding of managing our budgets. And we know that when we spend more money than our income, we have to borrow the difference. So year after year, when we borrow money and we borrow money, our debt keeps rising and rising until we get to the final place where our income and our expenses are equal. This is what I'm comparing with net zero. But the thing that's really notable is that when we get to net zero, we haven't solved the problem. We just stop making it worse. And so that's why there's urgency. So if we have the kind of feedback loops we got going with climate at 417 parts per million, what's it going to be like at 430 parts per million when we get to net zero? I don't know exactly what it'll be. It depends on how diligent our human community can deal with this, but we have to lower it beyond that. So when we get to that maximum concentration, we'll stop making it worse, but to make it better, we have to, first we start off at net zero, a balanced budget, where our human emissions is equal to the amount that can be sequestered. And that can include some technical sequestration, and that's another subject. But right now, there's no significant human sequestration. I mean, it's just minor at this point. But to lower the concentration over what it might be, 450, I don't know what it'll be, we have to reduce our emissions to less than the amount that can be sequestered from all sources, nature and technical. So when we reduce it less, this little dark gray represents the amount we would be reducing the concentration in the atmosphere, and we would like to get it to 350 parts per million to stabilize our climate. So in our lifetime, we probably won't see that, but we would like to see the peak and the trend in the right direction before we check out. And in doing so is a meaningful purpose for our life. And so I took that 17 gigatons of net sequestration shown in that chart, divided it by the world's population to come up with a budget of 2.6 tons per person of CO2 emissions. This is just CO2. It doesn't deal with methane, doesn't deal with other greenhouse gases, but CO2 is the dominant concern. So if you, in all your emissions, both direct from fuels we burn or indirect from products we consume, and our proportion of the share of the public sector, because I didn't include separate line for governments, such as military, such as highways and schools and hospitals. If we can get that down to 2.6 tons of CO2 per person, we will be at net zero, based on the number on that chart. Well, the only way to lower atmospheric carbon concentration is to lower the emissions to less than what can be sequestered. The demand by nature, and I call it a demand, for us to limit our emissions to less than what can be sequestered must be understood by the public. And so I know that y'all already understand this, so this is not new to you, but I really encourage you to have these conversations so that you can nurture that recognition in other people. It's so important that that recognition be, because when that recognition occurs, we have more tools, more possibilities. And it's actually quite as frightening as it might be to that person, and it was to me, when I first actually recognized, I was actually aware of climate change, but I didn't. I always kind of thought once we stopped the problematic practices, that it would just clean itself up. And then when I saw that wasn't true, I was a little depressed. But then later on, I said, recognize that because we can measure it, we can manage it if we understand that is important. So I'm looking for that recognition in the culture at large, but it's happening incrementally. And more people are talking about the measure, and that's what our subject is tonight. So I do find that hopeful, but I also want to emphasize urgency. Emissions are not the problem. It is emissions in excess of what can be sequestered that threatens us. So therefore, emissions in themselves are not the problem. It's the imbalance that is the problem. Now, obviously, we've got to breathe. And so we built an industrial economy on an unspoken, unrecognized assumption that CO2 emissions are free and unlimited. And we now know that neither of these are true. Very high cost to emissions above net zero, although that cost is imposed on different people in different places in different times. And that's just not fair. That's just not just. But it's not recognized also. So that's the path we have to do. So this chart shows the average emissions per person. And I thought it was notable. Here we are at 19 tons, 2.6 tons being the average to get net zero, and we're at 19 tons. So therefore, let's round it up to 3. So we're 16 tons over net zero. If the world averaged our United States emissions, we would be rising much, much faster than we are. But look at here at Costa Rica, and I've been in Costa Rica. It's a beautiful country, and it's a low-income country, but it's a country that has a social safety net. They've got a public healthcare system. They have a good culture. They have fiestas. They're religious. A Catholic country. Many ways we can relate to the lifestyle in Costa Rica. But they're only at 1.84 tons. So if the whole world averaged what Costa Rica does, we would be able to lower our concentration by 2.36 parts per million. So that's what it's going to take. It's going to take lowering our average emissions in the world to get to that point, or at least below net zero, because that's what removes it. And again, it can be some technology here, but the main driver is nature, and that's another subject. So want us to imagine living inside the carbon cycle, and And that can be a creative process, can be a very positive process of healing. And I speak for myself that when I'm doing something that is moving in that direction, I feel good about that. Whether or not I can meet the measure of solving the problem, it requires partners. We have to get partners, but until we have those partners, we can do what we can do on our own to at least minimize the damage of our own emissions. So as I said earlier, Annette is going to speak about COREworks project, and rather than recap that, I'm going to let you do it, Annette.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Eli, and all of you at Rockbridge Conservation for inviting me. And, you know, listening to Eli's introduction certainly does shed a light on why what we're doing is so important. And COREworks, I don't know how many of you are already familiar with it. Again, as Eli indicated, I'm probably preaching to the choir here with RAC. You probably all of us here probably have among the lowest carbon footprints of anybody in Rockbridge County, just because we do pay attention. We think about the choices we make in our lives. But even with trying to live as you know, have as small a carbon footprint as possible, that's not necessarily going to solve some of the problems that Eli presented, especially in terms of getting below, because it has been in the carbon levels have been increasing so rapidly. It's going to take a lot to get them back down to net zero. So this is a step. It's not going to solve the whole problem, but it's something that each of us who cares about our own personal choices, that's what COREworks is about. It's about people making personal choices to lower their carbon footprint. So I'm going to go ahead, and I have a slideshow that I'm going to set up. And all right, can everybody see it?
We got it.
All right. So COREworks is an initiative of Boxerwood. I'm sure everybody is familiar with Boxerwood. COREworks stands for, the CORE stands for Community Offsets for a Regenerative Economy. And it is very much a community-based program. And that, to me, is what makes it exciting and unique and different from other carbon offset programs that you have probably been aware of. So it is indeed a carbon offset program. And I know, again, I'm speaking to the choir, but a carbon offset, let's see. This is not moving, just a minute. Okay, there we go. A carbon offset is something that balances out. It doesn't prevent, you know, the carbon you put in the atmosphere, you've already put in. So then you can decide to take some actions that will literally offset it or balance it out. And this particular program, as I said, I think is unique in the way it's structured, and I will explain that as I go along. So this slide just shows that during the pandemic, we all felt very isolated. We felt locked down, literally locked down. We limited our travel. We limited a lot of our activities. But now that things are better, at least on that front, people are saying, oh, great, I get to travel again. I might get to see my grandchildren. I might get to go visit places I've been wanting to visit. I might want to get on an airplane. So when we do that, we have to be aware that here's a chart that shows how carbon in our atmosphere rose pretty much consistently up until the year 2020, at which point you can see what happened. And that is entirely due to a global pandemic. But during the year, during 2020, 2021, greenhouse gas emissions decreased 6.4% globally, 13% in the US, 48% in the global aviation industry, and air quality improved and water quality improved. So the question is, how do we sustain the eco benefits from the lockdown era while also enjoying the fruits of full living? So this slide shows you the homepage of the COREworks website, which will give you even more information than I can share with you right here, but it's a good place to go. It's coreworks.boxerwood.org. And you can see this little green button that says offset now. So if you decide you want to participate in COREworks, that's all you have to do is just click that button and it'll walk you through the process. So I will explain exactly what it means to participate and what benefits the environment gets and our community gets, if you choose to. So again, a carbon offset, as I said, balances out your own carbon emitting activities such as travel. It can be quantified and traded as metric tons of carbon dioxide, either sequestered or prevented. So depending on what the method is for which project you decide to invest in, or what kind of projects you want to invest in, when you secure an offset, you some of them, such as tree planting, are sequestering carbon, and some of them, such as providing solar panels, are preventing carbon from being emitted. So in this case, our carbon offsets are being generated locally by new COREworks funded projects that also bring additional benefits. And that's, to me, the part that makes it so exciting. And I will share what some of those benefits are. Each offset is valued at $120 to reflect the actual cost of neutralizing the emissions. So as I go through this, if you have questions, feel free to speak up. I'm not currently seeing anybody, but I can probably hear you if you speak up.
Annette?
Yes.
This is Barbara. What is the tonnage or equivalent of one offset?
It is one offset is 1 metric ton.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And here we go. How much is 1 metric ton? In terms of our travel activities, it would be one person's round trip flight coast to coast, or one round trip flight from the East Coast to Europe, or approximately 2,500 miles of driving. Now, these are, of course, just estimates. It depends. Each flight is different. Depending on what kind of car you're driving is different, travel conditions, there's a lot of factors, but these are just estimates. So for example, the flights my husband and I have taken this year, we have had family events in Florida and in Milwaukee. So we had 2 people traveling round trip to each of those places. So for each of those trips that we took, we purchased 1 offset. So I'm going to run through what the various COREworks projects are, and tell you a little bit about each one. So the very first one, the one that kickstarted the whole program, was the solar array at Boxerwood. So probably many of you have seen it there out in the field. If you go to the summer concert series, you can see it there. And that, what the reason we say it kickstarted our program is that community members actually donated the funds to make that happen. And that means that everything we take in from this point on, we are not paying back. And that is a misconception. I just talked to somebody this week who said, I got a COREworks offset and I chose the option of paying back the solar panels. And that's something we need to all do a better job of, is making sure people understand you're not actually paying that back. You're paying everything you do, every offset you purchase is paying forward for a future project. So that particular array at Boxerwood has been figured to provide 94 offsets. That means it will prevent 94 metric tons of carbon from being released into the atmosphere that otherwise would have been released. Its status is that it's completed and offsets are available. They're on the marketplace.
Annette, just
yeah.
a question about the units. Is that offsets over the lifespan of the array, or is that offsets per year?
I believe it's the offsets over the lifespan. Is that right, Jenny?
Yes, it is over the whole lifespan.
Yeah. And thousands of visitors to Boxerwood, including many school children, get to learn about clean renewable energy when they visit Boxerwood and they see the solar panels. And a great benefit is that Boxerwood now, instead of directing many of its funds to paying for its power bills, those funds can be directed directly into their programming. And that would be true for any nonprofit. I'll mention later that we are hoping in the future to fund solar projects for other nonprofit organizations, and for whatever organization was able to get the solar array, they would then be able to use those funds for the important work they do, instead of paying their power bills. Okay, so another very active project is riparian tree plantings, which I'm sure you know means planting along waterways locally. And 4 of those have already been completed, which you can see listed here. The number of trees planted has been 1,800, and the total, the number of offsets that have currently been verified is 29, with 125 more offsets still awaiting verification. And I will explain the verification process as we go along as well. So, and the additional benefits are watershed protection for water quality, erosion reduction, and avoiding downstream flooding. And again, education, expert tree planters and novices work together.
Annette,
Yeah.
this is just to confirm my assumption that then again, that is offsets over a period of time. I don't know what would
Over the
period of
life, yeah,
time-
over the life of the project. Mhm. yeah.
Is that what, 50 years, 100 years? What
I
is
guess
that?
it depends on what kind of tree they're planting. But they take all of that into consideration when they verify the number of offsets. I've never actually been part of that process, so I don't know exactly how they do it, but I know they do take all the details into consideration.
If I can
So-
jump in here, it has to do with how long the landowners agree to leave the trees standing. So actually, the trees will likely be left standing much longer than that and will offset and sequester even more carbon than COREworks is actually even accounting for. So that's how that lifespan is decided.
Thank-
What's your typical agreement timeframe?
It's usually 15 years.
15. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, and they'll probably be there much longer than that, and they'll get much bigger as that after 15 years as well. And this is the first time I've heard this, so thank you for asking that question, and I'm glad Ginny was here to answer that. But I guess landowners may not be willing to make any guarantees beyond 15 years, so that's the most we can guarantee. And then a project that I am especially excited about, though it does not generate nearly as many offsets, is the school composting. So far, Natural Bridge and Enderley Heights in BV have started participating, and the number of offsets is 2 per year per school. And the schools are provided with these super composters, and the kids learn about how to compost all the food, the leftover food, which we know is often quite a bit at schools, and it doesn't go to waste, it goes to compost. And we know that it will decrease methane emissions from the food waste in landfills. And again, it's a great education project for the kids, and it also creates soil for them to create their own school gardens. And you will see later that we are hoping to start more of these projects in more schools. So these are the projects that are still on the horizon. Starting composting for some of the Lexington City schools and others, solarizing additional nonprofit organizations, and more tree plantings. So as the offsets that are currently on the marketplace get secured, and as the funds come in, more and more of these projects can get done, because as I say, all of it goes towards future projects. And this is a slide that I use with faith communities, but we all care about caring for the earth. So that's good for all of us to think about. And so this is just a little graphic explaining that when you offset your emissions, you are indeed investing in future projects. So the verification process that I mentioned, and this again is one of the things that makes this program, to me, superior to other carbon offsets you can find. There's a lot of them out there. You can click a button when you buy a airline ticket and spend less, believe me, well less than $120 per metric ton. But there was recently an article in the Washington Post saying there's absolutely no verification for those. You have no idea what's actually happening with your money. And that's true with quite a few of these discount carbon offsets. So we really do guarantee that what you think you're getting, you are actually getting in terms of carbon being prevented or sequestered. So all COREworks projects must meet industry standards set by international offset marketplaces. Projects must be new, which means they would not have happened without the COREworks funding. The number of offsets generated by each project actually aligns with the amount of carbon being prevented or sequestered. The COREworks will retire your offset once it is exclusively allocated to you. You will receive a certificate, and they don't double sell offsets, which we don't know if other places may get away with that. I don't know, but COREworks definitely won't do that. All projects pass a double verification. So all of these things have to go through first an internal review with this COREworks staff at Boxerwood, and then an external review, which is a community review team of volunteers from our local community. So if any of you are interested in serving on one of these review teams, we are always looking for people who have an interest in these subjects to do that. The picture here is actually a meeting of one of the community review teams meeting over Zoom. So once it goes through all of that, it becomes verified, and only at that point do those offsets get put onto the marketplace on the website. So more than preventing emissions, COREworks projects by design, they impact where we live. They take place in and for Rockbridge County. They protect our local natural resources, improving water quality, preventing flooding, creating healthy soils, promoting biodiversity, and more. And they build community. They involve people from all walks of life as donors, doers, benefit recipients. They educate school children and adults. They grow citizens and stewards by engaging many folks in COREworks conversation and action. And in the first year, which was just completed a month or two ago, there were four completed verified carbon reducing or sequestering projects. There have been 123 verified offsets generated by these projects listed on the COREworks marketplace. 23 metric tons of CO2, or the equivalent, is offsets secured by individuals or institutions to shrink their carbon footprint. 1,800 or more trees have been planted by school children and volunteers, and 1,750 local folks have been engaged in climate change conversation, action, and service through COREworks and our program innovation. So that's it. Offset your travel now. If you have traveled lately or plan a trip coming up in the future, or just want to go and purchase a secure and offset because you want to do everything you can to lower the amount of carbon in our atmosphere, just go to the coreworks.boxerwood.org website. And as I mentioned, it's $120, and it is 100% tax deductible. You will receive a letter, tax deductible letter, and a certificate. So that is my slideshow. And I am happy to take any other questions. This is the first time I've done this over Zoom. And normally I do these in person, and I have a little flyer I give out to everybody, because I think it's important to have something people can take home and look at and say, oh yeah, I had thought about doing that. So I can't give you a flyer, but I hope you will all go to the website, check it out, and consider, if you haven't already participated in COREworks, if you will consider doing so. Any other questions? Yes.
I don't want to scare away anybody else, but I'm so excited. You mentioned that you and your husband traveled and purchased an offset to cover that travel. I was curious if like for an individual calculating, if they want to offset 100% and two people travel, and they're traveling on a trip that you've estimated would be worth one offset or would be compensated by one offset. Should you buy two offsets or?
Well, the slide that I showed you showed that one person traveling round trip from the East Coast to the West Coast and back is one offset. So if it's two people, it would be two offsets.
Two. Gotcha. Okay.
Since we traveled to Florida and Milwaukee, I figured two people made one offset.
That makes sense. Shorter trip. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. I do have a question about trees if nobody else wants to go ahead.
Sure. Ginny may be the one to answer that, but
good. Oh, good. I get all my questions answered here. Sorry. On the trees, we all know that not every tree makes it. Unfortunately, no matter how good our care is. Excuse me. Do you have a mortality rate built in, and what is that?
Yeah. So the actual like carbon math involved in each project accounts for a certain amount of mortality. I don't have that number right off the top of my head, but we got the formula from the EPA. So I figure we can trust them. They know what they're doing.
Oh dear. I used to work for EPA. Don't say that.
And there are also sort of other safety measures baked in. So with some of our projects, there are some replanting potentials if, say more of the trees than we anticipate get knocked out by flooding. There's replanting potential, particularly some of our tree planting projects are in partnership with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And so they have some very specific things in place to try to prevent that mortality element.
I'd be curious to know what that is. If you have a chance later to look it up, I'd be curious to know.
Absolutely. Yeah, look it up right now while we keep talking. It's on the COREworks website also.
Oh, okay, great.
I had a quick question about outreach to communities that couldn't necessarily afford to do the offsets. Are there any plans in place of how to talk about this with them, that they're not going to be able to front that $120 even though they might have the drive to participate?
I don't know. I have not heard about that. I think that's a great question and a great idea. I know that one of the faith communities that I brought this to has decided to pool their resources, and they together are securing 5 offsets as a community.
Okay.
So that is one possibility if we were to bring this, you know, to groups of people, and we could say, if you're interested, but you know, maybe you and 4 other people can get together, 5 other people, I guess it's 4 other people, 5 other people, everyone can put in $20, right? So something like that. But the fact is, this is the cost of the offset. So it's not like some products that can just get discounted.
Sure. It's just a way to talk to community members to better engage them, because I haven't been in Rockbridge County long. I'm about to hit 5 years, but I've seen that there's just pockets of communities that don't necessarily, they get overlooked a lot. So I just want to be able to understand how to approach this to them.
I think that's a great question. And maybe that's something Ginny and I can talk some more about.
So
Okay.
this is a voluntary offset program versus a regulation or offset like the regional greenhouse gas initiative that caps emissions on power plants. That is required if they go over a certain amount of emissions in their production for the power companies. And that is much more regulated. And whereas this is a market, in other words, if you find a customer that believes you're doing what you say you're doing, then that's allowed. So it's the integrity depends on the relationship between the vendor and the customer. The other thing I was wanting to say is that it is emissions for an airline would be to catch up with that emissions in the lifetime of a project. In the case of a tree planting, or in other cases, it might be immediate emissions avoided, such as the composting. The turnaround for creating methane in the landfill is pretty short. So that immediately is for CO2 equivalents. But I would also say that the gold standard would be to, as a volunteer, and is really you're marketing to people that are already aware of the damage this caused. For those that aren't aware of that, then there's, why bother? But in any case, that you could also sell the offsets not necessarily for an emissions, but just to support that outcome, just like you do other benevolences. You say, you want to sponsor sequestration projects and not necessarily related to an emissions. So you're setting yourself up to encourage emission reduction and sequestration projects. So I'm just saying that one could support that independent of an offset emission.
Yes, absolutely. Anybody can support us simply because they know it's the right thing to do, whether they're traveling or not. Right.
Well, thanks, Annette.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. And it was a small group tonight, but maybe you all can help spread the word, let people know about COREworks, and get in touch with us at Boxerwood if they have any other questions, or if they would like a presentation to another group.
So I had proposed that we would look into carbon tax discussion. Given that it's such a small group, I'm not sure. There are 2 really interesting videos.
Eli, before you launch the video, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think, I'm not sure if it's Eric or Elise at the Eric Sheffield box has their hand up.
Yeah, okay. Well, then go.
Hi, it's Elise. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
And and Eric's here too. We're eating our supper, so you don't want to see us eat our supper. Thank you so much for hosting this on this topic. I really appreciate it. And I think and really appreciate Annette. I think Annette perhaps didn't fully identify that this is a volunteer project for Annette, who is committed to being our COREworks ambassador. And it hasn't been easy to figure out how to explain COREworks. And so we're still working it out. And so every time that Annette goes out and talks with folks, that's so helpful to us, whether it's the choir or not the choir. But I thought just finishing up, it might be interested for you all to know the kinds of groups that Annette has reached out to. Part of the design of COREworks is not just to end up in sales, shall we say, but really to start having this conversation about our impact, how we live, what can be done, just beginning to start those thought processes or interest, those concepts. So Annette, would you give a brief review of some of the groups that you've spoken with in the last 9
Sure.
months?
Let me grab my my chart.
Because I think this sort of suggests that this is its own element, just having conversations as well as the
Yes.
content. Thought you might find that interesting.
So I have spoken with the master gardeners, and I have spoken. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to speak to the master gardeners next month. I have spoken to the native plant folks. I have, well, we had one with the Rockbridge Area Outdoor Partnership, but I was out of town, so Ginny did that one. I've done the Sunrise Rotary Group at 7 or 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever crazy time they meet. I've met with the Kendall Sustainability Committee. I have
Quaker meeting. Quaker meeting.
Yes, that was next. I've met with Maury River Friends meeting, Good Shepherd Lutheran, the Jewish community, Rockbridge Jewish community. And then I have several more scheduled. I have one, as I said, for Master Gardeners coming up. I have the Rockbridge Regional Library is going to, in the fall, in September, I'm going to do 3 for them, actually at their library branches, 3 different library branches in September. And then I have some others that have said they will do it, but they haven't said when. And I still have a number of groups to reach out to. It's still in process, but this has been, it's been a rewarding volunteer gig so far. And when I heard about COREworks, I've been a long time volunteer at Boxerwood with the education program. But when I heard about COREworks, I decided, well, this is the direction I really want to go with my volunteer work. So yeah, I think I'm gonna, yeah, well, it doesn't matter. I had this idea that I talked to Ginny about recently about even seeing if people would be willing to host house parties and invite their friends. So if you know anybody who would like to have a group over to their home, I could come and do my spiel there. So.
And Ginny has also spoken to the Lexington City Council by invitation.
Yeah.
So it's beginning to spin around. So
And I have been in touch with Leslie Ayers, who would like me to come to the county supervisors meeting. Either me or maybe Jenny would do that one. We'll see. But she again, that's one of the ones I haven't got a date for yet.
Yeah, I'm hoping that builds towards that recognition about the balance and the current imbalance. I think the lag in the culture is that we don't really recognize the cumulative nature of the emission and how urgent it is. And so that is, so you'll probably be speaking to some people that haven't had that record, not like this group tonight, but so that is a very valuable thing to do.
It is. So I'll just keep plugging at it and we'll see what happens.
We're all going to do that. So I'm not sure we're going to go on with the videos on the carbon tax. I'll watch it if some here expresses interest in it. I think it is interesting. The two videos, I had one of British Columbia, who has implemented a straight carbon tax, and there's some nuances how they pulled that off politically. And then there's another video that had more different economic models showing different scenarios for carbon taxes, and I think they're both very interesting. I can send the video separately, but my hope was to stimulate a conversation, but we have so few. I just want to get your feedback as to whether people are interested in playing those.
Eli, can I ask
Yes.
a question?
Yes.
Was your thought in putting together this webinar that carbon tax is another layer toward getting us to not only net zero, but to paying back? Or is it an alternative, or just how do you see carbon tax fitting in with this kind of carbon credit?
Well, carbon credits as described tonight is something we can do right now. It's not ideal. There's some, but it's available. And so people that are aware of their own personal emissions, people that are concerned about that, have a way to offset the damage of their emissions. And so I'm supportive of that in the meantime. But the potential of a carbon tax is that it would involve everybody and motivate people who really don't care or just are not concerned about the environment, but they're just balancing their own personal finances, would make choices that would be more environmentally friendly if the cost of emissions is rising. And it would also create rewards for businesses that marketed to reducing emissions and or clean production of energy sources. So much more penetrating, and therefore on the scale, but I didn't mention this at the beginning of the thing, but I had Clarence Edwards was a lobbyist with Friends Committee on National Legislation on carbon taxes, and they were promoting, FCNL was promoting a carbon tax and made a really good statement about that. That's why I reached out to them for, and he would have been able to tell us more about what the status of that potential is here in the United States. I don't know what it is. I mean, it's a big hill to climb to imagine that, but I try to put the best case scenario down, because if we stop considering it, then that makes it much less likely. And so because it's the best option, that's why I would like us to think about it, because I really think that could measure up to creating the economy that can get to net sequestration. I think the voluntary offsets are not, it's a matter of our own personal integrity to reduce our personal damage, but we need to do more than that. So I'm going to continue to believe it's an option. We'll look at British Columbia and other places where they have done that, and there's more I could say about that. But so I'm still wanting to hear if people want to continue on with that, or should we just save it for another day?
I think I'm gonna need to go,
Okay.
but thank you again for inviting me, and I enjoyed being with you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Annette, before you go, can I ask one more question? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I noticed that you use your comparisons because they're so quantifiable and easy for people to understand, I think, to transportation. And of course, it could apply to other activities. have you, but given that transportation is kind of foremost in people's minds, and easily quantifiable, is there an option for you, do you think, to reach out to transportation companies? Like, I'm thinking our local rental car people, like, would they accept you putting a little brochure on their desk? I mean, they probably would have to get permission from headquarters to do something in the actual reservation form online.
I mean, I guess it doesn't hurt to ask, but I'd be very
Or
surprised.
the Breeze, you know, the bus
Yeah, the
trip,
Virginia Breeze.
the Virginia Breeze, or I mean, even I was thinking at some of the local service stations that do annual car inspection. Because people are
Mhm.
looking at their odometers at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
And again, you know, I don't expect them to be putting it on. I mean, I would be surprised. I would be thrilled, but surprised if they had the inclination to add to their own complexities by putting it in their systems. But just a brochure on the desk, you know, when people are thinking about carbon impact.
Yeah, I don't know that people are thinking about it. That's the problem is, but you know, that's something we can talk about.
But seeing the brochure there, even if they don't take it, might.
Yeah, I mean, it's sure. I think that's it's a nice idea, and I will talk to
Yeah.
Jimmy and
Yeah,
we'll see.
or even like the state park, you know, has a literature thing, you know, like
Yeah.
how many miles did you travel to come visit the state park? You know, would you
Yeah, that's a
offset
good
that
idea.
with something locally?
All right.
And they're, you know, kind of in the business of you know, conservation and would be, you know,
Right. That's good thinking.
more clued in than
Yeah, maybe Natural Bridge, or, you know, we want to keep this local, so, yeah.
well, that's what I was thinking,
Yeah.
the local state park, Natural Bridge State
Right,
Park.
right.
Um,
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah.
oh,
thank
just
you.
making more work for you, that's all.
So
Okay.
I think we're going to close up
Okay.
because and yeah, and hopefully we can get a presenter that can make us aware of where the political challenges are for our carbon tax. That's what I was hoping to, in addition to the concept, to get from our previous invitee. But I'm going to close out, and I wish everybody a good evening, and maybe we'll see y'all next month at Jordan's Point. Look at the snakes.
Thank you, Eli. I do want to revisit the carbon tax. It might be a whole nother discussion, a whole nother seminar that we might want to have in the future. But I do think it's going to be surrounded more contacting businesses, trying to get them more involved. I think the voluntary aspect is the community outreach that we need to pose right now.
All right, y'all have a good evening. I'm going to sign off here. Look forward to seeing y'all in the future.